So today we're going to continue in the world of AutoCAD. To me, this is kind of the most important piece of AutoCAD, and for some reason, it's the piece that's left out most frequently when people teach AutoCAD, and they spend very little time on what Paperspace is and how it works and how to work with viewports and how to actually set up your drawings for printing. And so I want to spend more time dealing with that than other people would, and that's in fact what we're going to deal with all day today, is how do I get something where I've drawn it into something where I can go print it. And philosophically, AutoCAD works a little bit differently than other programs in that we're drawing everything full scale. And so thus far, when you drew a wall, it was 6 inches thick. So it's actually full size, right? When we go to print it, oftentimes we need to specify that it's in 1/4 inch equals a foot, or 1/8 inch equals a foot, or 1 to 200, or some scale. And we can do that relatively easily in AutoCAD using something that's called Paperspace. And so what we've been modeling in thus far is called Modelspace. And it's full scale, we're just drawing. And it's identified by a tab down here at the bottom of the screen that's called Model. Everybody see this tab in their AutoCAD? If you don't, you might have to turn it on. Sometimes it's disabled by default, and I wasn't sure whether all the computers would have it. But you should have a tab that's called Model, and then by default we have a tab that's called Layout 1 and a tab that's called Layout 2. Okay? And those just show up by default. There is a little plus icon next to the tabs such that we could create as many new layouts as we wanted to based on our drawing. So the model space is where we're just drawing. Okay? The paper space, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this Layout 1 tab. The paper space instead represents a sheet of paper. So we see right here I have a white sheet of paper. Notice the color changes, right? So it's meant to look very different. On this white sheet I have what's called a viewport, that's identified here, that shows my drawing in it. And chances are by default it will show everything in your drawing. So it's showing all of the topography here, it's showing my floor plan, it's showing all of my elevations. Okay? So this represents a sheet of paper. Before we can really get into the sheet of paper, we have to specify what size it is and what printer it's going to be printed on and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to right click down here where it says Layout 1, and I'm going to go to my Page Setup Manager. Right here. And that thing brings up this little Page Setup Manager icon. We see that Layout 1 is listed. We can click on Modify, and this will then modify the Layout 1. Okay? So here, we have, this looks like when we were printing, right? This is essentially the same thing as printing. It's a printing dialog box, but it's setting up, it's pre-setting up the settings for this particular layout. So I'm going to specify under printer or plotter name, instead of the image, I'm going to specify that we're going to go to a DWG to PDF as my default. Okay? I want to change the paper size. It's going to be an ArcD paper size, 24 by 36 inches. Okay? It should be in landscape, which it is. Okay? Now, because this is an actual sheet of paper, we're printing at 1:1 because it's an actual sheet of paper. So it should say 1:1 under scale. Over here on the right, under plot table assignments, we're going to specify AutoCAD.ctb. And we're going to check the box for display plot styles. And then below that, under quality, I tend to bump it to maximum. I figure it can't hurt, and these computers can handle it. Okay? The rest of our options are all fine as the defaults. And so I'll go ahead and say OK. And you may or may not notice the paper size change. In my case, the paper size did change. Right? So I'll go ahead and click on Close. And we see that I have this overall sheet of paper. Right? And that represents my 24 by 36. I also have a viewport that's here, and I can move that viewport around just like any of the other objects that I've previously been working with. Right? So I can type Move, or go to Transform, or Modify, and then Move. There. And I can move the object around. So let's look a little bit closer at this viewport. If I click on the viewport, and then I go to Properties, which I always type Properties, but I think it's under Window. No. Hold on a second. got to be here somewhere. Well, just type properties. Sorry about that. I'll have to find it. And this will bring up the properties window that explains information about this particular viewport. This works for other, like let's say I had a line that was here, and I clicked on it. It would show me information about the line. So it works the same for other objects. We just haven't had a need to use it just yet. Where it's important is when we get to, get rid of this. Why are you not erasing? There. What's important is when we get to the viewport, we have some extra information about it. So I'm going to move this down a little bit. And under miscellaneous, right, we have something called display locked. Right now it's set to no, which means I can actually interact with this. Right? Then we have something called standard scale. Okay? The standard scale right now is set to custom. But if I click where it says custom, right, I can actually specify the scale of the drawing. So for example, I could specify an 1/8 inch equals a foot, 1/16 or quarter. Okay? And it gets bigger as we go up. So there's 64, 32nd. You can see it's getting bigger. Okay? Now, I can't quite see everything, so let me zoom out and let me make this viewport bigger for a second. And then let me go ahead and adjust this scale again. And so I suggest a 1/4 inch equals a foot. And it looks like I lost my drawing. So I'm going to double click on the inside of this viewport, and it'll highlight in black. And I'm going to type Z followed by E for extents, which will zoom everything so that I'm centered again. And then I'm going to double click outside of the viewport, and then click on the viewport to select it, and go back and adjust the scale again. So there's 1/4 inch equals a foot. Okay? I can see some of my contour lines, but I don't see my floor plan. So I'm going to double click on the inside here, and I'm going to type pan, and move this around until I see my floor plan. There it is. All right? So I have my floor plan there. I'm going to double click outside, or excuse me, I have to get out of the pan command, then I'll double click outside of my viewport. And then I'm going to come with the viewport selected. I'm going to go to display locked and change it to yes. And what this does is it eliminates my ability to change the positioning or the scale of this drawing. So if I'm double clicked to be inside the viewport and I zoom in, it will zoom in on my drawing. Okay? If I didn't have this locked, I'll show you what happens. If I said no, and I zoomed in on my drawing, the drawing gets bigger inside of the viewport. Okay, so my scale just changed. So I don't want that to happen. So instead, once I'm all set, I'll click on my viewport, and I'll change the viewport to be locked. So I have my scale set. Right? I'm suggesting drawing at a 1/4 scale. 1/4 inch equals a foot for this. If your drawing doesn't really fit, once you get the elevations up, etc., change it to 1/8 scale or change it to whatever scale seems appropriate to you. Okay? I'm not married to it having to be 1/4 scale. I just think it's a good place to start. Okay? So I have my drawing shown here. Right? If I were to print this right now, I would have a border that would show up around my viewport, this black box. So I'm going to change this viewport to be on a layer that doesn't print. And I know it's a little weird because it just means that the border of the viewport won't print. Right? It doesn't mean that the content of the viewport won't print. So I'm going to jump over to my layers here. I'm going to go to Layer Properties, and I'm going to make sure that I have a layer property called No Print. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it No Print. There it is, and I'm going to make sure it won't print. And for whatever reason, I like to make these green. There's no reason why, but I do. So now I'll take this viewport, and I'm going to change it to be on the no print layer. And why is it not? whatever reason, it's not changing. I'm having issues with AutoCAD today. Yeah, it's not wanting to change layer. So anyway, there it is, changed. Okay? So when I go to print this, this will show up as a viewport. Okay? I'm going to jump over and I'm going to create a couple more viewports so that I can see each of my elevations. And I may have to adjust these a bit so that they all fit on the page ultimately, but this is part of the process. So I'm going to go over to the View tab, and you gotta love it when it won't. It changed. 2015 changed when they updated it. Should be able to. Let me type viewport. All right. I should be able to click on new viewport, but of course they won't let me. So I'm going to go ahead and do a new single viewport. I'll say OK, and then I'll draw that viewport right here. And I have another view of my drawing. Okay? This one is scaled independently of this one. Right? So I could, for example, have a site plan that was much further out in scale, or we can zoom in and see one of these elevation views. So let me zoom in on my south elevation right there. And then I'm going to change the scale of this south elevation to be the same 1/4 inch equals a foot. Right there. And then I may need to adjust the actual size of this viewport a bit so that I get my whole building. All right, something like that. So this moves independently, so I can type move or go up to modify and then move. And I can move this, say, below my drawing. Sorry about that. Something like that. So I can move it around independently. Okay? Now, I'd like to have all 4 of my views oriented correctly, so I'll use the same viewport setup here to be able to do all of my views. So let me go ahead and just copy this viewport. I'll make a copy of it. And this time I want to see, and so I'll double click and type pan. I want to see this elevation. Okay? Now, unfortunately, this elevation is not in the correct orientation. So I'm going to use a command, and this is written out in part 3, right? I think it's in part 3. Yeah, step 9. I'm going to use a command that's called mv setup. So I'll type mv setup, right? And it's going to have some options that show up. I'm going to pick align or type A for align. And then I'm going to click on rotate view or type R for rotate view. And it's going to ask me to specify a base point in my viewport, which is usually the center of the viewport. And then it's an angle from the base point. So these work in absolutes, right? So it's 90, 180, 270, and 0. So we'll go at 90 first and see if it goes in the correct direction. Okay, that rotated the viewport, but it's upside down, right? So when I go back to angled, specify the base point, rotate view, right? This time it's going to be 270, right? Because, like I said, it's in absolutes. It's not relative to its last position. So if I type 270, it'll flip itself over. And now I have a viewport that's looking at this elevation correctly. Okay? So I know this takes a little bit of practice to get your head around it. That's why we're going to spend today doing it. Let me go ahead and copy this view. We'll put it up here. And once again, I'm going to go to MV Setup. So MV Setup. Align, angle, oops, sorry. Align, rotate view. All right, this one was 180. And then let me go ahead and pan. Notice that none of these viewports are locked yet, and that's an important distinction. Right? If your viewport is locked, they won't let you do this rotation. All right, so I've got that one, and I'll copy this one more time. Up above here. I know it doesn't fit yet. And I'll double click to be inside MV Setup. align, rotate view, and this one's going to be at 90. And then I'll pan and get this elevation to show. So what I've done is I've taken my model space layout, which is right here where everything is folded out the way you guys have been drawing it. And in Paperspace, on the sheet of paper, I've adjusted my viewports such that I get all 4 of my elevations in their correct orientation. Okay? So I need to arrange these a little bit more. So let me go ahead and move this viewport over a bit so it's there. And then let me go ahead and move this so that it lines up. And I can, just like I've done before, I can use either my no print layer or my guides layer. We'll use no print, that's fine. I can do array, and I can pull off of this corner. Oops, my object snap's not on. Turn on ortho. And then I can move this viewport from here to there. Oops, I need to turn on intersection, sorry. There we go. There we go. So I can line this view up so that those two line up. And then for these views, it's less critical, but it's going to take some tweaking. So let me go ahead and move this one down. Like that. And then let me shrink the viewport up a little bit so it's not extending off the page. We'll adjust the size of this viewport a little bit. We'll move this down. Shrink the bottom of this one, and we'll move it down. Oh, maybe it's down a little too far. We'll move. And then I'll adjust the size of this viewport a little bit. The dotted line that's showing up here is kind of a safe line for anything inside that dotted line is probably printable by most plotters. Right? It is arbitrary, it depends on the plotter, but it gives us a general guide for what's available. Okay, so I have this set up where I have my main floor plan and I have each of my 4 elevation views. Okay? But you notice that in these views, like in this view here, I have a piece of topography line that slices through my building because in model space, right, the topo lines go right on through. Okay? It doesn't look very good in my layout view to have that topo line. So what I can do in each of these views, and before I do this, I should actually lock these views. All right, so let me take all 4 of those, and I'll change the display to be locked, is I can control what layers show up in each of these views. Right? So if I double-click on this layer, so it's the active layer, and then I go to Layer Properties, right, I can find Topography. There it is. And over here, right, there's a button for Viewport Freeze. Right? And if I click on that, in the current viewport, it will turn off that layer. So I didn't turn off the topography on the actual plan layer, but I turned it off only in this viewport. So now I'll move over to this viewport, and I'll do the same thing. I'll go to Layer Properties, I'll look at Topography, and I'll click this Viewport Freeze button. And you see that the topo line goes away. So I have the ability to change what layers show. So if, for example, I had a 2-story building, I would draw both stories one on top of each other. And then in the viewport, I'd turn off the first floor and leave the second floor on, and then vice versa in each of the views. Right? So you're doing that control at the viewport level, which is a lot easier. So let me go ahead and once again, we'll turn off there, and we'll turn off there, so that those topo lines aren't showing through. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plot this just so that we can see what shows up. Right? So if I go to Print, which in AutoCAD is called Plot, It'll pull up all the options that I already specified. So this is going to make a PDF out of my file. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And we'll save it onto my flash drive. Let me create a new folder for today. This is exercise 123. And notice that it's the name of my file followed by the name of the layout. So in this case, it's layout 1. So I'll go ahead and click on Save. And it will create, and it just opened it for me. So this is what I'm seeing after it's plotted. Right? So you see I don't see the borders around it, but I see each of my elevations. Right? My line weights have shown up. So if I were to zoom in a little bit, we can see that some of my lines are thicker than others, which is as it should be. Right? It probably needs a little bit more work. Right? There's my elevation views, etc. Okay? I probably need some more work with my various line weights to really make it look good. Okay? So now it's time to go back to AutoCAD and say, OK, this isn't too bad, but now I want to start to add a level of detail. So you guys, some of you have asked me previously, I want to show the hidden lines. Right? You've asked me how to do that. And we've worked through it, or maybe we haven't yet, but you couldn't see them in Modelspace. Okay? When you move to Paperspace is when you'll see the hidden lines. Okay? So this is something, this little set of stairs is inside of a wall, but I drew this specifically so that we could make this a hidden line, so you could see what a hidden line would look like. So to get a hidden line, first thing I need to do is actually load the hidden line in the first place. There's only a couple lines that are loaded by default into AutoCAD. We have to bring in a few more lines. I can do that by clicking on the line type button, which is right next to where you would specify the line type. Right? Or I can type L type, and it will bring up the line type manager. Right? Looks like I already have a couple loaded in. If I click on the load button right here, it brings me a list of all the AutoCAD lines that I can bring in. Okay? I tend to like the hidden to line, right, which is a little bit finer dash. That tends to be the one that I use. But again, you can experiment and you can play around with any of them. Once you click OK, it will then show up in your list of line types. So there's hidden to. Right? If I click on Show Details, I can get a little bit more information about it, including what's called a global scale factor, which is sometimes useful. This should actually be a default of 1.0. And I don't know why this showed up as something different. But I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I'm going to take these lines, and I'm going to change the line type of all of them to be that hidden to line. And so as I said before, right, I can't see it in its model space that it is a hidden line. However, if we jump to the Layout 2 section, I'm supposed to be able to see it here, which of course I can't. Let me go ahead and print it and see if it shows up when it prints. Of course it's in use, right? And it's, of course, not showing up there either. Let me go back. Maybe I shouldn't have adjusted that. It's always great when what you're trying to show doesn't work, right? It's supposed to show up really nicely there. Let me try a different line type in case that one didn't load correctly. Just try regular hidden. Still, something's up with my global scale factor. Oh, 1.0. It should be 1.0. I'll have to sort out what's going on with this. No, still not showing. Okay, well, I'll figure out what's going on with it. It should be that simple, and you should see it just fine in the previewed view. Okay, so, oh, the one other thing that I didn't show you last class was, technically speaking, we have some topography on the site, and it wouldn't hurt to show the topography underneath your building, which I've done here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete these topo lines, and I'll recreate them so that you can see how I created them. I'll go ahead and press delete. Something is wrong with my keyboard or something today. Maybe I just need to restart it. All right. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll call this new layer Topo Guides. And I'm going to change the color of the Topo Guides layer. We'll make it maroon. Oops, wrong color. Topo Guides, we'll make that maroon. We'll make it, it's a non-printing layer. Why did it not? Boy, I'm having a lot of trouble with AutoCAD today. I apologize. There it is. This one is the one. Magenta, non-printing layer. We'll make that active. I'll go ahead and close it. Okay, and so now I'm going to create guides that are pulled off of the topo line, right? So if we look at my floor plan here, I have a contour there, I have a contour here, and I have a contour here. I know that they're all 1 foot apart, right? So this one starts at, call it level 0. This would be plus 1 foot. This would be plus 2 feet as I go up in space. Okay? So if I type ray, and I pull a line off this side of the building, and we put a line off that side of the building, right? In this view out here, let me do a ray again from here. Right? I'm doing this elevation, a ray from this point, and a ray from this point. Right, that's going to represent the 3 contours in section as I go through. So what I need is I need a starting point. Say here, that would be 1, and then we'll offset this ray by 1 foot, 2, and 3. Okay, so that from this point, I'd be going up a foot and then up another foot. Now, I want to position my building slightly differently so that as the contours go through, I have a little bit more in the front and a little bit less. So let me go ahead and move these down a little bit. We'll say maybe 9 inches or so, something like that. Okay, so now I need to draw a line that goes from that intersection to that intersection to that intersection, right? That represents the ground. So I'm going to use a line that's called a spline, which is a curving line. So I'll type spline or go up to draw, and it should be listed there. Spline, there we go. And I'm going to start at this point, and I'm going to go to that point, and I'm going to go to that point. And I'll hit enter when I'm done. And this line here is now representative of the contour of that side of the building. All right? So let me go ahead and change that to be on my east elevation layer. Something is just up with AutoCAD for me today. I'm going to have to do it from here on east elevation. There it is. And we need it to be a thick line, so we'll say maybe a 5.0. It also should be a continuous line, and my line weight we'll say is maybe a 6.0. So it's a thick line. All right, so there it is, right, representing that side of the building. It looks like I'm a little bit low, so I'm going to extend this line down. So I'll go up to Modify, Extend, and it's going to ask me to select objects, so we'll select the objects. There, there. I'll hit Enter, and then I'll extend that down, and I'll extend this down. Okay, so this topo works exactly the same in the other views. So if I turn back on my original guides, there, I can use the same 45-degree line to reflect around. So let me make sure that I'm on my Topo Guides layer. And then I'll use my rays again. I'll start down here at the bottom. So where each of those intersect, I'm going to pull lines across. There. Okay, so those are the bottom 3 feet of topo lines. Now in this view, right, I'm now looking at it right here in this plane. So I need to run a ray out that way and a ray out that way. And let me go ahead and turn off the guides layer so you can see this a little bit better. Okay, so let me go ahead. One more ray going out that way. Okay, so it's the same 3 contours. So it's this contour, and this contour. And what I need to know is I need to know where they intersect this line. So it's going to be right there. It'll be 1. So I'll go to ray, and we'll go down. And then it's going to be right here, and it'll be down. And it'll be right there, and that'll be down. So I know that this upper line at that point is 1 point of my contour. The middle one is going to be right there. And the last one will be out here, so I need one more little ray that goes off in that direction. And now I can do a spline. And this may be too far. If I've lost you, do a straight line at the bottom, right? But this helps to the realism, so I want to show you how it works. So we'll go through that point, and then we'll go through that point. Hit Enter. And then I'll change this object to be on the south elevation layer, continuous, and we'll do a line weight of 0.6. And now we see that piece. Okay, once again, my lines are a little bit short, so I'll have to extend them, but you don't have to watch me do that. I'll turn back on my guides. Oops. And then I need to pull the lines across the same way again. So we'll do ray, there, there, and there, going off in that direction. So same thing, only this time it's going to be in this plane. By the way, you can, if you want a ray that goes in both directions, it's a construction line. It's called X line. Sometimes that's an easier strategy. All right, so now I'm looking for the intersection point right there. So it'll be a ray from there down. Oh, I should turn these off so that they're a little clearer for you. The intersection point right there. And the intersection point right here. And it's going to start from the high point right there, to the middle right there, and to the end right there. And so this needs to switch over to the west elevation layer. Be a little bit thicker. So there's that. And then I get to the final one. So once again, I'll turn on my guides again. I'll pull my rays across again. All right, so those are across. Turn that back off. And in this view, I'm looking right at the edge of the building right there. So it's where those same 3 lines intersect. So I'll go to ray, and we'll intersect there. And right there. And the last one is way off over in here. Right there. So once again, I need to go this way. There we go. And my spline will start at that point. And it will go to the middle right here. And it will go to the end right here. And so I'll take that curve and we'll change that to be on the north elevation. And we'll change the line weight to be at 0.6. And there it is. So I now have those topo lines drawn. If I go back to my layout view, right, all of those lines that I just drew are showing up. Of course, now my hidden lines are showing up. Go figure. So let me go back and see if I can get them to work. I think it was just a matter of it wasn't selecting the objects correctly. Let me take those, except for this. Yeah, it just wasn't changing. So we'll go to Hidden 2. And you can't see them here, but when we jump to the layout view, there they are. They're showing up as hidden correctly. Okay. The topo guides are showing up in these layers. They're non-printing layers, so it doesn't really matter. But if I was worried about it, remember I could double-click onto my layer, and I could turn off under Layer Properties my topo guides. I could turn them off in that layer, and they wouldn't show up anymore. Okay, so I have a lot of flexibility in terms of what I can show and what I don't show. Right? Likewise, if I wanted these topo lines to show up as hidden lines as well, right, I could go back to my Layer Properties. I could go to my Topography. I could change my line type. We'll go with a regular hidden line type. There. Right? I can also choose what color that would show up in. Maybe I want it to be this isn't black, this is kind of dark gray. Say OK. And that would now update those lines as well. And when I go to print, right, we can now see that those are dashed. We can see that that is dashed. So we're starting to get this flexibility. Okay? So what you're looking for today is a layout that's in ArcD that has your plan and it has your 4 elevations with 3 of your elevations rotated so that they're in the correct view. Okay? This is what I want you to post today at the end of class. If you want, you can make it a JPEG and post the JPEG too, but all I care about is the PDF at this point because long term you're going to be making PDFs out of your files and then going across and printing them as part of your assignment. Okay? So I want these laid out. Don't worry about text or dimensions or anything else on these, just the 4 views, or the 5 views, the plan, and the 4 elevations. Okay? Next class, we're going to talk about things like text, title blocks, collaging, color, and diagramming over the top, right? All the other things that you can do. So today's about getting these views set up and oriented correctly. Okay? Are there any questions? No, I know that was a lot to take in today. But if you have trouble, let me know and I'll come around and help you. This line here that I was just making? Yes. So we shouldn't draw a foundation line. We should wait and do it with the topography. Ideally, it would be with the topography. If you drew it with a straight line, that would be acceptable. I just wanted to show you how you would go about pulling the topography inland. Exactly. You just have the ground line, which is traditional of an elevation. A section would have the foundation showing, right, and maybe a poche underneath.